Part 2, Chapter 16 of Life and Lillian Gish. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. Life and Lillian Gish by Albert Bigelow Paine. Part 2, Chapter 16. Director Lillian. Griffith now took an important step. He removed himself and his players from California to New York, really to Mamaroneck on Long Island Sound, where he had leased the old Flagler mansion and grounds, and contracted for a studio soon to be completed. The mansion itself would serve for the executive offices, possibly for occasional scenes of grandeur. Lillian and her mother made the transcontinental journey with Harry Carr, now Griffith's right-hand man. Their train passed through Massillon, but at lightning speed. Carr remembers that all the way across the country, Lillian looked forward to this splendid moment, and though very late, refused to go to bed until it had passed. She was greatly excited and kept trying to point out things to me, though you couldn't see anything but the ticket office. I was impressed by how much of the child she had. Lillian, with her mother and Dorothy, established themselves at the Hotel Commodore to be handy to the Grand Central Station, and thus within 30 minutes of Mamaroneck. It was costly, and sometimes they planned to have a farm near the studio. 5 acres, with pigs, cows, chickens, horses. At least it was something to dream about for spring. Griffith, having got his new studio about ready, conceived the notion of having 2 pictures in Florida, neither of them with a part for Lillian. A great disappointment, for Nell still lived on the Blue Dog houseboat at Miami. However, there were compensations. Griffith wanted a picture made in his absence, and agreed to let Lillian direct it. To direct had been her ambition. "I have changed my career," she wrote Nell. "Am a director. Yes, am directing Dorothy's next picture. Will start Friday. Have the story all rehearsed, and will start taking then." They had done the story themselves, she and Dorothy. It had been partly inspired by a piece of business that Dorothy had found in a comic magazine. A husband had complained to his wife that she wore such dowdy clothes. No one would notice her on the street. When they went out again, the wife walked a few steps ahead and made faces at every man she met, with the result that all looked at her, much interested. We decided to make a picture around that situation, Lillian telling the story, and call it "She Made Him Behave." We were always looking for picture possibilities, particularly for leading men. James Rennie was at the moment in New York, disengaged, and was very glad to get the part, his first picture. When I first proposed directing a picture for Dorothy, Griffith said, "Why do you want to break up your happy home?" Meaning that Dorothy and I would fall out over it. We took the chance, and he went away and left us. She was barely 23. However well versed she was in the technique of picture making, she had never directed an entire picture. She was taking over a new and untried studio. She was assuming the responsibility of spending what was at least a modest fortune. Moreover, Griffith had never seen the script of the picture, for with Harry Carr to help, they made many incidents and scenes as they went along. The fact that Griffith was content to go away and leave the venture in her hands implies 2 things. First, that his confidence in Lillian was large. Second, that the motion picture business is conducted on less rigid lines than other important enterprises. Both conclusions are warranted. Griffith did know Lillian, and the motion picture industry is conducted like no other business on earth. To begin with, it is not really a business at all, not merchandising. You are not buying something which you are to sell again. You're creating something, painting a canvas, doing it with human beings. Your accessories are mechanical, but even here the personal element is the chief factor. The enthusiasm and goodwill of the photographers, the electricians, the stagehands. Griffith believed that Lillian could shape these to her taste. On the set, they were her friends. She called them by their intimate studio names, Slim, Whitey, Joe, and so on, and never left a set that she did not go to each one and in her grave, dignified little way thank him for the help he had been to her. But let Lillian continue. I believed that no director had brought out Dorothy's sweetness, especially her comic sense. I believed I could do it. Of course, I had been in pictures a number of years and knew something about directing, but nothing at all of practical mechanics. I knew nothing of the measurements for a set, and was afraid the company would lose respect for me if they found it out. I went home and paced the floor of my room, measuring the number of feet, to try to get some idea of what I wanted to talk about when I got back to the studio. As a result, I ordered a room that was too big for the height of it. The camera couldn't get far enough away without shooting over the back wall. The cameraman, who had come from the war with a case of shell shock, would walk up and down and throw his hat on the floor and declare he couldn't stand it, but he was really very kind, and we learned something every day. But then the worst developed. Mr. Griffith had bought an engine to transform alternating to direct current, and when we were ready to shoot the picture, we didn't have enough juice for the lights. We had to put a wire all the way from Mamaroneck on poles, a costly job. Still, it wouldn't do. We were promised the power, but we didn't get it. Sunday was my big day. Our picture had a wedding party, and I could get extras from Mamaroneck, 30 or 40 of them, at $2 a day. Then when we were ready, our lights failed us. It would be 6 o'clock in the evening before we could do anything, perhaps not even then. Desperate as was the situation, she appears never to have lost her nerve. In a letter from Harry Carr, always present, we gather that her mechanical assistants were most concerned. The kindness she had shown to the roughnecks came ripe. They almost worked themselves to the bone for her. When anything went wrong, they looked ready to faint in a body. Lillian would sit hour after hour alongside the camera, waiting for the lights to come on. One day she sat there uncomplainingly from 9 o'clock in the morning until 11 at night, without a flicker of light. Uncomplainingly, but what must have been going on inside? There was a small studio in New Rochelle, the Fisher studio. It was a poor thing, but at least there were lights. The Mamaroneck electric people promised that if she would work there a few days, everything would be all right when she got back. So they carted themselves and their sets to New Rochelle and began again. It was certainly a poor place. Lillian remembered damp, the cellar full of water, no heat, and being late November and into December, it was very cold. Often the actors had to hold their breath so it wouldn't photograph. The next Sunday we all moved back to Mamaroneck. The lights, they told us, were all right, but that was a mistake. Back we went to the Fisher studio. In all, we moved back and forth 3 times. I very nearly lost my mind. Of course, I was responsible and spending money. Oh, by the thousands. Mr. Epping, our business manager, every night brought me the items of what we had spent that day. I'm not much at figures, but I could read the total, which was not cheerful. But everybody stood by me. The boys, as we then called the electricians and property men, especially. The actors, too. Everybody. The last day's work had to be done on Fifth Avenue, New York. It happened to come on the day before Christmas, and I didn't want to postpone it. We engaged a bus, from which Dorothy had to look down and see her husband ride by in a cab with another woman. To work on the street without a permit laid us open to arrest and fine, with a good chance of spending Christmas in jail. To get a permit would take time, which we could not afford. "Will you take a chance?" I asked those who were going to do the scene. They agreed that they would, but things had a dubious look. Nevertheless, we got our bus and our taxicab and started. I was on the bus with the cameraman, George Hill, now a famous director. Dorothy at the other end, the taxi just below. We had not gone a block when an enormous policeman started over to see what it was all about. Then he took a good look at me and stopped, placed his fingers at the corners of his mouth, and put up a smile. You remember the scene in Broken Blossoms, where the brutal father commands his terrified daughter to smile? I knew right away the big policeman had seen it. He really smiled then, and so did I. "Oh, it's you, is it?" he said. "Yes, and this is my sister Dorothy, and we're trying to finish a picture before Christmas." "Go right on," he said. Further up the avenue, another policeman called out, "What do you think you're doing up there?" I put up the smile myself, that time, hoping he had seen the picture. Evidently he had, for he laughed and waved us along. I thought it safer not to break any new ground, so we turned and made the circuit. We made it several times, and were not troubled again, but helped. That night we knew we were done, and everybody was so happy, and so sorry, weeping on one another's shoulders. By the time Mr. Griffith came home, our picture was nearly all cut and ready. When he saw and approved of it, I was very happy, but it had nearly killed me. Lillian decided that directing was not for women. Remodeling a Husband, as the picture was finally called, turned out a financial success. She had spent $58,000 and 28 days making it, but it netted a profit of $160,000 and doubled Dorothy's picture value. She was proud of all that, but did not care to try it again. A little while ago, David Wark Griffith said, "Lillian directed Dorothy in the best picture Dorothy ever made. I knew she could do it, for whenever we were making a picture, I realized that she knew as much about it as I did. Gave me valuable ideas about lights, angles, color, and 100 things. She had brains and used them, and she did not lose her head. You see what confidence I had in her to go off to Florida and leave her to direct a picture in a new studio, with all the problems of lights and sets and 1,000 other things a director has to contend with. I know how her lights failed on her, and all the complications that came up, and how she handled them, and how out of it she got that fine picture. One of the best. She didn't tell me, but Carr did." End of Part 2, Chapter 16. Recording by John Brandon.